directive saying that anti-racist training for federal employees will be banned. Critical race theory was specifically named. And then 2 days later, the state of California was threatened with lost federal funding for teaching the 1619 New York Times project on slavery. So our work, it couldn't be more important right now. You see behind me, I have the 2020 census. Reminder, right now, it looks like it might be extended to October, but there will be a decision from a federal court today. So that's what I've been up to.
Great, and I get a feeling Senator Lopez is there as well. Hi, Linda. Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning. Hi, I'm glad you were able to make it. So we were just doing check-ins, and so everyone is just giving a sense of, well, first their name and a sense of how things are going for them, and also we should reflect on last time and anything we want to share regarding the last meeting we had as well. So maybe Mark, do you want to go next?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Everything's doing okay. I'm ready for the meeting today. I've been looking forward to it. It's going to be a good discussion.
And Kelly. I think you're on mute.
I'm the, sorry, I'm the,
oh, the interpreter.
Yeah.
Right. And then Alexandria and Amy have joined us as well. And Joseph. So maybe Joseph, do you want to introduce yourself and see how you're doing? Quick check-in.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Joseph. I am currently getting hired within the state of New Mexico through CYFD. There's a new position for youth who have experienced foster care like myself. It's called a youth advocate. So I've been trying my hardest to get everything together and in order for that. As well as I work at Pizza Hut. I'm currently an assistant general manager. So I have that on my plate as well. And then I also have been running the organization Levia, which is a group of foster youth who are former and current foster youth to help better the foster care system. So I'm really looking forward to working with you guys. I do wanted to say, because I wasn't on the first meeting, that our group Levia is trying to impact the way that the CYFD system sees racial injustice and stuff. So any ideas, any thoughts that you guys would have on that, please feel free to share with me.
Great. Alexandria and Amy, do you want to have a quick check-in before we move ahead?
Hi,
Okay.
good morning. I'm Alexandria Taylor with the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. Great to be here with you all this morning. And I'm just listening in.
Great. And I know Amy was going to be in and out of this meeting. Thanks. And then, Senator Lopez, we're excited you're here. First, we thought you were coming, and then we thought you weren't, and now you are, which is great. So we're at a stage where we want to learn more about certain policy areas or issue areas that have been brought up by the committee. And one of them was the Hispanic Education Act and also the Anti-Racism Bill. Two areas that we would love your insights on with regard to what we should advocate for or what we should speak about within this committee. So this is sort of a listening and learning kind of space for us. And so we would love to maybe ask you questions, but first, if you're able to just give a little brief intro about yourself or anything you'd like to share, and then a little bit about the Hispanic Education Act and the Anti-Racism Bill, if that sounds good to you. Does that sound good?
Good morning, and it sounds good, but what I will tell you is I didn't realize that I was also to give a background on the Hispanic Education Act. I was understanding just that it was to be the institutional racism bill.
Okay,
But
you can do that.
I could do maybe at the next meeting if you'd like. I can give a much more in-depth on the Hispanic Education Act. I know that it's been worked on at this point to have some amendments introduced during this upcoming legislative session. And I can give much more information on that. I'll just have to go back and get my files and some other things on that. So I
Sounds
apologize.
good.
Great.
But good morning. I'm sorry.
Good morning.
All learning how to maneuver in this new world. I had to get my little one on her class because she's 8 years old, a third grader. So Mama is learning how to do the Google Classroom and everything else still. So thank you for your patience. I've been a senator for those here in the New Mexico legislature now finishing my 24th year in the legislature. I represent the Southwest quadrant of Bernalillo County, which is the Southwest Mesa and the South Valley. So I'm honored to represent the community, and of course it's election time, so we're all doing the election, hoping to get to go back for another term. And single mom, I have a 19-year-old who's at CNM, learning the online thing also, and of course I heard about my 8-year-old. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you. Yes, and so we would love for you to share a little bit about the bill that has, and maybe a little history and context of it too, you know? So that would really, really be useful for all of us.
The bill, and I did send it to have it shared when we get into the discussion specifically, but this particular piece of legislation, it's entitled, and what we have been working with it over all these years, is the Anti-Institutionalized Racism Bill. When initially working with public health advocates and many other community activists also who have been working on this important issue over many, many years. I think it's actually come back from many other groups that have been working over this over many, many years. And in fact, what I did, just to show you, we talk about history. New Mexico first had a town hall that was called Breaking Down the Barriers of Cultural Sensitivity in New Mexico, and that was back in 1993. I was one of the discussion leaders on that. There was a book that was, and a study that was done by Project Change back in the day, that was by Levi Strauss, which is a very big employer back in the day here in Albuquerque. And it also talked about opportunities for racial unity in the 21st century. So I still have some of these books that I used to participate in many different groups over the years since I was in college. But long story short, all of these efforts have come forward working with public health folks. Kiran, you know, the group that you work with many times over, for the training that comes in, for what we have to do and make changes in our community. And I think where we are at this point in time is just, I think, a compilation of everything that our communities, all of us, have been working towards. So this bill that we're present to you was presented about 10 years ago, 11 years ago in the legislature. I didn't go back to date myself, but we've been having a slow discussion in the legislature about what we do just to make incremental change within our state function that we have control over specifically. The bill didn't pass up until, gosh, now it's 3 years ago, 3.5, maybe 4 sessions ago. It actually passed both the Senate chamber, the House chamber, and went up to Governor Martinez, but she vetoed it. And I won't go into the diatribe she and I had at that point offline. But I still bring it back with the advocates. We have support from across the nation. And I have letters of support that have come in from advocates who've been doing this work across our country. And we're going to try it again. The two bills that I have that I did ask if they could be shared when we go through it. There's one bill that specifically talks about looking in state government, what we can do to work on anti-racism training and make sure that we look as to what our hiring practices are. It includes looking at within our public education department, specifically looking at what we do is, I'm drawing a brain on this one. Ethnic studies, excuse me. Making sure we talk about histories in the real context or the real history for our students. And then it goes K through 20, by the way, on that one. And then some other areas looking at for any entity that contracts with the state of New Mexico. So where our tax dollars go that we have oversight on, that they too also have to show to us what their policies are with regards to anti-racism, the institutionalized racism practices for hiring, you know, what's their direction and such. And last but not least, two other things. The other bill that I did submit for it to be shared is what we introduced this past special session in June. The governor, of course, is very supportive of it, but it was what I called a watered down version. I didn't want to do it, but hey, in the context of this political movement, I know the governors wanted to back it, and we were trying to get it through in a special session without bogging down in some of the details. It did get passed by the Senate. There was an amendment placed in by the House, which was fine, but because of the way the body works, the Senate had already adjourned, and we weren't going to come back just for the one bill. It's just the way the process. We're back at it again in January. And then the other part I wanted to mention is that when the bill didn't pass over those past years, I did change it into a memorial that still had the basic concepts of the bill. And we were the first state in the country to pass even just a simple memorial with regards to institutionalized racism. So that's a little bit of the history as to where we are at this point in time.
And Senator Lopez, can you tell us about some of the pushback that was received on the more robust bill? And even though it passed Senate and House, you know, these are the kinds of things that we need to think about moving into the next session, right? So what was some of the pushback about?
Some of the pushback that I get in my chamber to start with, of course, it goes through two committees. They try to assign it to 3 committees. And again, that's just the legislative process. If your bill gets two committee assignments, that's pretty normal. You get 2 committee assignments and then you go to the Senate floor for debate. After it passes, it goes over to the House. I did get one year a 3 committee assignment because they thought it cost money, and I'm like, no, this is not money. This is something already embedded in the system. So we were able to move it with a majority vote on the Senate floor to get rid of that 3rd committee assignment. Some of the questions that I get from not my side of the aisle, this is my colleagues on the other side, is first of all, they ask, what is racism? And when you have to sit there in front of a committee and explain what racism is, if they even have to ask the question, it's like, wow, we have to go back to racism 101. And many of them, for whatever context they are coming from within their own community, it's just very blatant and very hurtful many a times in the questions they ask. The other pushback, of course, they go, well, this is going to cost money. Can the state really afford to do this? And the answer is we can afford not to. And you give the biographical information on the state, the makeup of our communities, and we are. I don't even like using the word minority anymore, but we are a majority people of color state. Demographic breakdown in the next census, hopefully we get all of our numbers in the correct way. that shows even more so of where our population is. And, you know, we give the information over and over, but it's still, they vote no. And it's just, and when you get to the Senate floor for conversations, the hurt sometimes comes out because it's a complete disregard for what has happened in communities. We talk about history. History needs to be written. You know, I mean, it's the conversations, and they go, what do you mean? So you have to go back to 101 again about specifically how history is written from the eyes of the victor. It's always been done that way. And when, you know, it's an in-depth conversation that we try to get into. But ultimately, if I have the votes, which I do, we kind of stop it at some point and we move on.
Can I just follow up on that? Thank you for your leadership and courage and bravery and persistence, because I know how difficult this is. But you mentioned it was watered down, and you said there was like a last minute amendment that slowed the process down. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I did share this, of course, with the executive persons that I was working with. I was willing to just go specifically with a smaller measure, and I did submit them both for you all to look at. You do have copies. The amendment that was placed in House Judiciary was working with the State Personnel Office, Pam Coleman, just to strengthen and tweak the words as to what we look at for purposes of hiring. And I'm very comfortable with the language that was put in. It's just, how would I say, it was just a little bit too late before the Senate was already moving forward, and we couldn't stay around and wait for the House to go through their amendment process. And the House of Representatives right now, we'll see what comes in with the new session, with the new legislature. But they were having 3-hour debates on every bill. And as they go through that process, it was slowing down. It would have slowed down more the legislative process, and the Senate wasn't going to sit and wait for another day to do that. We needed to get out. Did that answer your question, Nancy?
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is that at UNM in 2014, we created a preferred criteria for all faculty hires that says demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion, student success, and working with broadly diverse communities. And it has made a difference in terms of hiring. And then in 2018, we also approached, Kieran and I went to go speak to the UNM Staff Council, and it was adopted. Our hope is to make it a minimum requirement, but right now it's preferred. And I wondered, because when I circulate this memo in other circles that will remain nameless, the idea is, oh, well, we already have policies on equal opportunity, so we don't need this. And it's like, no, we actually do need that, because it's not about, oh, we think we want people that look different. Do you have a demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion, right? So actually including that in a rubric means something very different. So I wondered if there was any element of that.
Not at this point, but I'm sure that as we move forward with the bill, any input that you have, I know Pam Coleman, the Director of State Personnel Office, otherwise called SPO, she's very willing to work with us. So maybe we can have a chance to chat with her, or send me some suggestions, and then I can also share them with her as we continue to work the bill on that, because we need to get it as best as possible. And one of the things that I've learned over my years in the legislature, and I shared this with some of the governor's staff during special session, is that sometimes in the efficacy, as they say, to try and get something passed, and I call it watering down, to try and get something through, it's okay. But what I've learned is that if you don't put in what you need to get the first round, the first time, to try and come back and amend it the next year or 2 years or 3 years down, it ain't going to happen. It's the system works. Because sometimes my colleagues get weary, they get tired. Oh, we're at this again. Are you serious? And I mean, those are comments that come from both sides of the aisle too. You got to get it right as best as possible the first time.
That's so true. I love that suggestion. And we do have 2 or 3 additional people that joined, and I would love for them to just at least introduce themselves. So Evelyn, Elisa, would you just introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm so sorry I missed most of the conversation, but I had an office meeting I had to attend, and I'm here now, and thank you.
I know Alicia just came in and Shawnee just came in.
Hi everyone, my name is Shawnee Harvey. I am the admin for the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee for the Council, and I am here to get a better idea of what everyone is up to, and I'm sorry if I have to jump off early, just putting that out there. Thank you for having me.
And Elisa came in.
This is the interpreter. If you're talking about Elisa Skinner, she's the other interpreter for this.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think that's everyone then. Thank you. So any questions for Senator Lopez? Any more questions or comments?
If I may make mention, Tammy just shared the 2 different bills, the one that we had this past special session, and then the other bill that's been introduced many a time over in the legislature. And we're always open to working for some improvements. We'll get it through the session. I know we will, and up to the governor for her signature. But let's make sure that we have what we need in there.
I have a question, Senator Lopez. It's regarding the fiscal impact, knowing that this year we know the budget is going to be so tight and very complicated. And
Yes.
I wonder, has some sort of a fiscal impact analysis been done on the cost of racism? So not on the cost of this, undoing the racism, but the cost of racism in our state.
I've never seen a fiscal impact report with regards to that.
And how does that happen? What do we need to do to help make that happen?
What could happen, I think, is if you wish to do something along those lines, which I think would be so wonderful, is to create a memorial, a study that could be put together and move forward starting this year after the session, and directing Department of Finance and Authority, the Legislative Finance Committee, Bieber, they're at the University of New Mexico, and other areas that could help to put that together. I know with Miss Alcantara, of course, we so miss her. She was our authority that we used to go back to, try and find some of this information that we needed. So I think Bieber would be a wonderful opportunity for us to try and get a good grasp of what the cost is to the state of New Mexico. And I think that it doesn't happen immediately, but I think within a year we could possibly have something ready for the next legislative session in 2022. I also mentioned too, what we have tried over the years is to asking our Legislative Finance Committee, which directs the budget from the legislature's perspective, also working with Department of Finance and Authority and Administration to do their analysis based on looking as to the effect of not necessarily racism, but how it affects the public health in our communities, looking at different perspectives as to how some of these bills affect. Hasn't gone anywhere just yet, but I think maybe with our council, from your perspective and others, that we can begin to look at that, because it also affects our public safety issues that we're dealing with on the cost of, because everything, no matter what we try and do in the legislature, it all comes down to money. That is the argument that's always given for everything. What's the cost? What it's going to cost us as a state? If it costs too much, well, let's just kind of hold off on it and let it go someplace else at this point. But as you know, our state budget is, we're always kind of balancing and we never have quite enough money. So that's an argument that we try and work around so that we don't get written off on many pieces of legislation.
Can I ask a question? I was looking at the bill and point number 3 on page 2 says institute a statewide evaluation of race and gender gaps in hiring, promotion, retention, and pay. What I was wondering is if there was a way we could signal that we want people to use intersectionality to look at these pay gaps, because too often, and I know the city of Albuquerque has a plan that says, oh, we want to ensure that if the companies that we contract with have no pay inequity, but it never addresses race. And then the same is true usually when they're like, oh, we want to address race. So I wonder if there's a way that we could signal, because I'll give you a quick example. I just looked at the enrollment of the, at the University of New Mexico, first generation college Native American women. Only 56% of them returned from last fall, compared to first generation white women, 80% return. So that right there tells you, right, that if you're not looking at race and gender and class together, you would miss some inequities in terms of who's returning and ultimately who's graduating, right? So the same is true for pay equity. Like if they're like, oh, we're just going to focus on the women without saying, well, what race, what class origin, are they first generation college? So I wondered if that could be specifically mentioning intersectionality. I don't know how to make that more clear, because what I'm afraid is that business as usual just says, we're just going to look at race alone or gender alone or first generation college status alone, versus let's look at all of that together by social location in our tracking of who is being served by our state and who's not, who's being hired, who's graduating, etc.
I'm writing that down. Okay.
And I have a lot of language. I'm going to put a little memo to you where I have a lot of language around that to the university about how they report graduation and things like that. So I'll put it in the chat also. And I did put the preferred criteria language if you want to download it, that we've been using for the last 6 years at the university.
Okay. And, you know, and part of it too, that I've seen over the years, and many of us have too, is when they say, oh, well, we're looking at the diversity, but what I've seen in state government, it eliminates many of us people of color from advancing. And not to be denigrating, but the white woman will always go forward. The minority, etc. And I'm not denigrating anything, but to the fact it leaves the rest of us out. As in Spanish, there's a saying, I won't say it here, of course, but it's just kind of like, well, we're here twiddling our thumbs then, and what happens? And that was part of the initiative as I've been chair of the Senate Rules Committee for I've been the longest serving chairwoman, by the way. But I've had a chance to look at the administration of different governors to see who they put into positions of power as secretaries of the departments, who the department directors are, and you go through management. It doesn't reflect the state. The workers do the work, but that's part of the initiative that I'm hoping this bill, that we can begin to hold the administration's feet to the fire too.
And this is that tricky piece, right, Senator Lopez and Nancy and others, that how we do want to talk about intersectionality, but not at a cost to diminishing the racial divide, right? And that's what ends up happening, even with some of the best legislation out there, whether it's tied to affirmative action and, like who's benefiting. And you just mentioned white women, right? So it's that is who benefits from affirmative action more than any other group. And so how do we have an intersectional lens, but do it in a way that's authentic and doesn't end up being business as usual, right? Which is that people of color will be left out. And so that's where it has to be tight enough, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think it's tight enough, but it's also those people in positions of power to see what their buy-in is, and truly not just to say the words, but really being committed. And I think with the council that the governor has put together, she's willing to work through all of these issues. that exist. And we're changing an institution, and an institution fights back. I've seen it. They fight a time over, and it's hard to get through it, but I believe it's possible, but we have to start someplace. And I believe the opportunity that we have to begin this process so that my generation moves on, but those of you who are younger that I see here, you will feel the change as you, of course, mature, and as we all get more mature. But it's just part of that process. And for the kids who are in high school and in college now is where my hope is that this change happens.
Other comments, questions? Senator Lopez?
So I just posted the information. I couldn't agree with Kieran more. For me, intersectionality can't exist without critical race theory. Like, they're inseparable. So claiming that you're doing critical race theory without intersectionality is white supremacy, and claiming you're doing intersectionality without critical race theory is white supremacy. So what I did was put a one-page summary in the chat that summarizes looking at graduation rates over a 10-year period at a public university that will remain nameless by looking at social location, and you'll see the disparities there that will remain hidden if you're just looking at class alone or gender alone or race alone. And I will send you the actual article, the research article from that. But I do have a lot of language around why we need to never separate critical race theory from intersectionality for looking at inequity.
Okay, and I'm trying to download, so bear with me. I'm still learning the system, how to do that. I still try to learn. If I may make mention also, as we tweak and add any other language in the bill, any suggestions I say are always in a meeting with Pam Coleman through SPO, State Personnel Office. The language on intersectionality and such is a word that we really don't per se use during discussion with my colleagues. I'm not saying that they don't grasp it, but it takes us into a whole nother, I call it another level of discussion, and we can't really get back into the true discussion on what this bill is supposed to be doing. It's just the way that my colleagues and it works. It may work well in higher education and some of the other groups that we participate in, but we'll make sure that we tweak the language that we can, so that it's understood by everybody. And there's no question where they go off into their diatribes that they just do, and it just irritates me to no end. It's just what I've seen. And I'm sure you at the
yeah, I can't even imagine, because I think some of the times I know from having one foot inside, one foot outside, right? We can get in a bubble at the university, you know, and then the language we're using isn't something that people can relate to. And so it gets lost in translation. And so how to make sure that it's accessible and makes sense for everyone. Otherwise, people, they will turn it into a whole discussion on a word, right? That they're having trouble understanding because they didn't do the work for themselves.
I put something in the chat that I often never use the word intersection. I said, if we want to address inequality, we have to look at race and gender and class together. And people usually get that. And here, class, I'm saying class origin, like, did you grow up in a household with a parent with a 4-year college degree? That's one way of measuring class, but we're never going to get income from everybody. But yeah, you're right. We don't want to confuse anybody. We just want to say that looking at race alone and gender alone or class alone doesn't give us the complete picture of what's going on and who's underserved. That's the easy way to explain intersectionality to me, but maybe it's still not clear.
For my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I don't care what we put, it ain't going to happen.
I know.
No matter how moderate or from, you know, if they're from Albuquerque, Senator Mark Moore's, he's Hispano. His mom's from Española, but he has this whole other context, and he's never experienced it. He's a Lobo. He played football for the Lobos. I mean, he goes off on this whole diatribe on it. It's like, no, forget it. He just, he's Hispano, but he's never experienced it. I'm like, really?
Yeah, and that's I can tell you from Asians in our community as well, the bootstrapping mentality is what's hurting us in New Mexico. It's the holding up the one example of someone that did it in spite of the systems, right? And saying that that's what everyone else should be doing is not taught in our schools. So in a way, I think some of the resistance we keep seeing is because we have generations that have been socialized into not understanding or intentionally being miseducated. So they're confused, and it's our own people sometimes.
Oh yeah. And we do. And that's where the ethnic studies curricula that was included in the bill comes from, is where we can have the real histories stated, shared, so that our people, our young kids, students, can learn and hear the reality of where we are when we talk about colonialism and all of the other factors that come in. I learned it listening to my family, but then for those who are able to go to college is where you get the ethnic studies. But the majority of our people still don't get to college. Okay, and I'm speaking incorrectly, but most of our young people have not arrived at that point. So for you to get to that, freshman, sophomore, junior discussion about ethnic studies is like, well, we're missing it. It needs to go back at the beginning, which is why it's part of the context of including it on the bill. I've also had another bill on ethnic studies that almost got through, but it was installed in the House Education Committee. I still haven't forgiven the person who stopped it, but we get around that at some point. Just part of that context as to the dance that we do in the legislature.
And how to, even at the university level, Nancy knows this as well as everyone else in this meeting, that it's a very small few that actually get access to that education at UNM or any higher ed institution. And many of our young people of color from, the local communities are steered away from those classes because they might be the one kid that actually made it to college. And so the family is pushing them into something that can actually serve the whole family and the child, right? In terms of profession. So they'll push them into go for a profession, go into engineering, go into whatever it is. So the whole of the higher ed community isn't getting access to that education either. And so Nancy and I have spent years trying to figure out how it can be some sort of base education. Like there's a 3-credit requirement now at UNM, and that if you're graduating from UNM, you will be required to have at least 3 credits in diversity, equity, inclusion, right? And that is nothing, but it's a base. And it took us, how many years, Nancy? Like 5 years.
It was
for
crazy.
That. 5 years.
And
just
resistance all the way.
All the way.
The whole way. We don't need this. Oh, we speak a foreign language, so we know everything about oppression. It was just insane.
And part of it is where we go back on the higher education department. I know that your institutions, each board of regents runs separately from, the way that the process works. But I think working with the higher education secretary, which right now we have an acting, but maybe the next person that the governor puts in there as a permanent. This is one of the venues that we can begin to work through with this bill too, is to kind of flesh it through and see what else we can do now that there's a state mandate. Our tax dollars still go and pay at the universities of New Mexico. They totally act autonomous. there are things I think we can do for that, and our community colleges too.
What do you say to, I have another question that I know came up, not this time round, but in past years, where people at the local, more rural level in New Mexico were saying, how can our institution that receives public monies, right, state monies, actually find the monies to do the training or to do whatever it takes that's in the bill, right? So there was this pushback from institutions that are smaller in more rural New Mexico. What can we say regarding that? Because it's not just about advocating for something, but it's listening and trying to counter real challenges, you know? What would you suggest around that?
When the question has come up about the cost, because as that one area of the bill does say, for anybody receiving state funding, so it is and goes to nonprofits and others who receive money. What I have always said is that as an HR function, most of your entities all have to do training. If you are a nonprofit, you have a person who's in charge of, usually if you have 10, 12 people, you still have to have a training of your staff. This can be incorporated into that. Don't fluff it off and say that this is, oh, it's an extra cost to do anti-racism training. You already do training in HR. This is should be a function that's a normal function of your HR department. So it means management and those have to reconfigure that. For state government, for local government, municipalities, also for county government, you already have an HR department. You have to do training. At least you can add this in part of it. It's a function that we all do as part of business. This should be a normal part of business. To me, that's what my answer is. At that point, and of course they go, oh, but and I said, so my background is in HR, so it's like, well, do you have to do this training? Yes. You have to do this? Yes. Well, add in anti-racism training.
And they're going to have to rehire people who can actually deliver it too, right? So that's the other thing. I think that's what I think the work involved for them is why they sort of like, push. Yeah.
No, those are questions that come up from the other side of the aisle. Because they're people. It's like some of us know how to run and have done business before. So it's just a normal, the normal way to run a business is you add this in. You have to change the, that's part of the discussion.
Linda, may I ask, there are programs out there they can purchase and bring in, am I correct?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Evelyn, you want to share something about your part of the state and how some of this might could be a reality over there? Do you have anything you want to share?
Definitely. As I'm in the poor southeastern part of the state, border, as I said, about 2 miles from the state line of Texas. So you know how I show in the color grid. And the thoughts around, you talk this, what is it? The white, it's our way or no way. What we say go, we have the money. And so it's the changing of the elements, it's the speaking out, it's not taking everything that, to be different and how that you want that change. And it is getting us more involved in the legislature, coming back and saying, this is what's going on and this is what we want to incorporate. So it's just getting more involved. One or two can do what they can, but as you said earlier, Kieran, it just stops sometime and you have to wait another year. And when you wait another year, you get further behind. So that's what's going on in our state. But right now we have 2 or 3 people who are really centered in making a difference. And I think we're really going to be involved and start.
Thank you, Nancy. I know you have to leave.
Yeah.
And thank you, Evelyn, for those words. Mark, do you have anything that's coming to mind, or any questions or thoughts, or what are you thinking right now?
Well, really, no. I've just been listening, learning a lot, paying attention. I appreciate everybody's sharing. Thank you.
Mhm. And Joseph, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I really just been listening. I do have a lot of experience with the state legislation here in New Mexico. For CYFD, we're always going up there trying to embed CYFD with new proposals and new laws to try to get passed into. So I understand how difficult that part can be. And I also really learned a lot of information, so thank you for everyone who shared.
Okay.
And the information is tremendous.
Yeah, it's been such an honor having you here, Senator Lopez. And we may have some questions after the fact, once people read some of the language and the suggestions that they are thinking of. Could you put in the chat the name of the person that we should be reaching out to?
You're asking for, with regards to any suggestions that you have?
Yeah, the language, you were saying that I think Senator Lopez mentioned someone who we need to talk to if we have suggestions, like the things that Nancy and I were working on with the preferred criteria at UNM. You know, we were saying that every hire, whether it's faculty or staff at UNM, needs to have a demonstrated commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion is in the preferred criteria now of all positions out there. And so that kind of language could be added across the state on,
Yes.
you know.
That
Yeah.
could, and the person I had mentioned is Pam Coleman. She's the director of the State Personnel Office.
Okay, perfect.
We'll be chatting soon also about what we can do. So, and I know
Is this COLEMAN?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know she was, I think, listening at our last council meeting, the full council meeting that we had last week. But she's the person that to talk to with regards to the language that you and Nancy were just talking about. Because then we can get that language, you know, figure how we can work it in. And if you could, the language that was on the amended bill that shows the tracking on the second, it was Senate Bill 9 that you have in the chat. Those were some of the suggestions that she was trying to work at. So I think if we can tweak everything, we can get it better for this coming session, so that when I drop a bill, everything is as good as best to be in there. So we can just hopefully have no more amendments. Let's just run the bill through and get it done. It's just my style. I like to try and have as much as best as possible to have something in the legislation, so when it's dropped, it's in, and then shield it from getting any further amendments and get the bill through.
That sounds about right. And
but please review anything you have for suggestions. I am open to. Please and thank you.
That sounds great. And then one final thing, you're in the larger core committee. What should we be thinking about in our subcommittee that could help you in your discussions up there? What are some of the things that you would recommend?
I think, just to be quite frank, is even just the discussion that we're having here, I'm hoping that we will have it in the larger council. And then any of you here on the subcommittee, please, with your suggestions that we can add to the legislation for the draft. I think is important. And I'm sure the council, for the other members will have some suggestions maybe also, but it's just, it's a small start. It's not this huge thing that's going to cause this huge, major change by next year where we're going to have all the equity and everything that we need. But you begin to, break down the base that this institutional racism is built on. And this is one way to start putting the cracks in at the base.
I have something to say. This is Mark, sorry. I was wondering, let me gather my thoughts. How can we stay informed on what is happening going on through this committee? Is there a minutes report? Is there something that we can, because often what happens if we're not listening into the meeting, or if I'm able to listen into the meeting, I don't have an interpreter, how can I know what's going on through that committee and stay up to date? Will anything be ran through us, through the subcommittee? Hello, can you hear me okay?
I lost connection and I'm back again, and I just heard the end of what Mark said. But I think Tammy or Alexandria or others, Amy, might know more about those kinds of logistics in that facilitation. Tammy, do you know any?
Minutes. I sent the minutes out from the last meeting. I can resend those from our first meeting. It's also being recorded, and I'll have the minutes to this meeting out probably within 2 or 3 days, as well as the recording that will go up on YouTube, and that's for public use.
Nice.
Yeah, this is Alexandria, and that's a great question, Mark. One of the things I was thinking about during this discussion, and thank you so much, Senator Lopez, you clarified quite a few things for me today. I think at our last Central Committee meeting, one of the questions was should the council take up time looking at this bill since it already has traction and has been moving forward? So one of the things I was thinking during this discussion is for us to be clear about how the council taking action on this bill could be beneficial, right? And I think the fact that you have persevered for 10 years in trying to get this passed in our state is pretty compelling in and of itself. And so if there is like the discussion around including an intersectional analysis, even though not using that term, right? If there's discussion about how we support this bill and strengthen it if there's room for it to be strengthened, I think is really important. And so I would love for this committee to include recommendations as a part of that conversation. And so how we really are clear why it's important for the council to take this up.
I also have a question regarding the permanent fund. And I don't know if Senator Lopez would like to say something about that, because one of the things this committee might want to discuss is the whole notion of early childhood education or family literacy regarding early childhood education can be part of, using some of the permanent funds for that. But that's a discussion we want to have, right, at some point, because it's going to be a robust discussion up there, right, in the legislative session. What are your thoughts, Senator Lopez, on that?
Oh, that's another area we can all chit chat about. There's so much with regards to that, tapping into the permanent fund, just at a 1%. What I would like to invite each of you and get it, please, to those in your in your networks. The Democratic Party of Bernalillo County this evening having a town hall, virtual. I'm one of the members who'll be there. Representative Javier Martinez, Representative Mo Maestas, and our land commissioner, Garcia Richards. We are going to be talking for an hour and a half on the permanent fund. And Ariel, just looking at tapping in 1% of, diverting a little bit. It's, we have $20 billion sitting there.
Wow.
$20 billion sitting there. That we could tap and divert just 1%. I would say 1.5% because we're in a tough situation financially, that even 0.5% could go to our public schools. But, that's a discussion to have on the financials. But we're going to have that discussion tonight from 6 to 7:30 p.m.
Okay.
And Tammy, what I could do, or Alexandria, or whomever, I can send you the link a little bit later, and then maybe just dispense it. It's a thorough discussion we're going to have about the politics of it. And the politics has happened in my chamber, in my committee, with a few members who are not coming back this coming session. So we're hopeful that with that change, we can get the House to pass the bill again, that the resolution, it gets out of the Senate and goes on to the voter. We have to figure if it's a special election that we hold in the spring after session so that we can get the voters to vote on it, and we can move forward. We're at that point in time where we need some cash. And when you have $20 billion sitting there, $20 billion.
And what it gets used on is the tricky piece, right? And so if there, please share.
Yeah, I mean, the corpus itself helps to fund our public education system. There are beneficiaries, and we'll describe that tonight, who the beneficiaries are, who receives. We're not tapping into that money that the beneficiaries get. There's still an extra amount of change as that I look at, that we can use to help fund some of these other integral for literacy, early childhood, fund, the Martinez Yazzie lawsuit. I mean, there's just so much that's entwined into this cost. And, I think this evening may give us on the council an opportunity to hear a little bit more, and that may spur some more discussion within the council itself to, for our advice to the governor.
The anti-institutional racism bill should also be part of it, so that the fiscal piece is never, ever questioned, right? So there should be something there. Yeah. I
mean, there's the isms are there. It's there. It very much is. And when you have, and it's the power structure that we have in the state, it's in the county, it's in the city, it's in the state. When you have the powers that be that hold the reins of money, that's where it comes to, what it comes to. In caucus, we've had our own discussions. They're biases that we all bring to the table. I have my own biases too. But when you talk about the money aspect, this is something that will really, make a difference. And I know we'll discuss that tonight too. And there's input from the public to send questions. So I will make sure I share that information so that maybe Amy or Tammy to get through the emails.
Yeah, okay.
That'd be fantastic. So that's perfect. That's something we can all engage in, because it'll help us even in this committee figure out where we stand on things. I know where I stand on it. And that's why I wanted to have Javier Martinez come speak to us as well, right? Because Representative Martinez is someone that's heavily involved in this conversation too. And one of the key things is it's not just about early childhood education. It's about what kind of early childhood education that's received, as well as other family literacy programming. And I think sometimes people, even on the left, are critical of the use of these funds for something like early childhood education, because if we think about it, K-12 education from its onset, never had an equity focus. And now we've been spending these hundreds of years trying to bring it in, right? And so how we start funding the early childhood education and how it's used is crucial. Otherwise, we'll be spending the next 100 years trying to close the gap in the littlest ones, right? In the pre-K. And so we need to do it right from the get-go. And so it's that the left needs to hear, that it's not just any old early childhood education.
And if I may make mention too, this last year, not this year, but the year prior to, excuse me, we did set up an early childhood fund where we diverted, I think it was like $30 million that begins to create a corpus of money that can then be used in upcoming years for kind of the interest off of it to fund early childhood programs. A caveat, if the state is in dire financial distress, which we are at this point in time, that fund can be used. So even though we have 30 million or a little bit less now, because we did take 10 million out during special session, if we don't have enough money to balance the state budget, all that money disappears. Even though we put 30 million into this fund to help fund early childhood, there's still the caveat in the legislation that if the state is in dire distress, which we are at this point, we're $1 billion short in our budget, that money disappears. So we are back to ground zero on early childhood funding. The same goes with our tobacco settlement, all those money. I mean, it's just the way that the structure of our budget is set. We don't really have something that sits to really fund early childhood that's consistent. So I just wanted to share that it's have a chance to make a difference. So you'll hear that tonight too, discussion.
Wonderful. Any other comments, questions from others? It's been such an honor, Senator Lopez, have this time with you. And this committee is just a powerful little space for really sort of grappling with some of those issues. And we know they're intersectional in terms of it's not just about education, it's about the juvenile justice system, as well as immigration, and thinking about, like for us in the education space, all of the other, whether it's health or other, are all connected. And so, yeah, it'll be a complex conversation in this space because everything's connected.
We are all connected.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tammy, for holding it together. And any last thoughts, Alexandria or Amy?
So for documenting purposes, for our short-term goals, because we are to come up with those, how should we list those?
So one of our agenda items was to really come up with what are some of our areas that we want to either learn about or are proposing are important to us. Well, definitely the anti-racism bill came up last time, so that is in our short-term goal. But the permanent fund and really trying to understand where we stand on that and learning as much as we can so that we can make recommendations is a very short-term goal that, and I'm telling you, those two things will take up a lot of our time to get straight, right, in our own heads and in terms of what we believe as a committee. What other short-term goals do we have, others on the committee?
I have a question. This is Joseph, by the way, if I may. So I was just listening to your question about the goals and everything. And one area that I want to personally look into would be the racial justice within CYSD, because there's a lot of youth that we have in my group who are of color who share their stories. And some of their stories about their foster families or about the way CYSD is treating them is really, really insane. And we are designed for the youth with the education part of it. So I was wondering if that would be something we could tackle as well.
Yes, hopefully the anti-racism bill will cut across all of that, but if we're going to get into specifics, then we need to talk about CYFD, we need to talk about the healthcare system, we need to talk about public education, we need to talk about every single institution under the state. So we would list all of them. And so we might want to have a conversation about that, Joseph, right? How they're interconnected. So CYFD and the foster care system and the juvenile justice system and the education system and how they're all, and immigration, right, are all interconnected. So let's make that a goal, that we're going to have a conversation about all of that. And we can pick any one of them. Let's pick CYFD and show how everything is interconnected.
Awesome, that works for me. Thank you so much.
And then Mark, what's on your mind? What would you want to lift up?
Well, you know, I'm still right now trying to think of the things that I feel that we can do that are not going to go through legislation and not going to be happening through bills, the things that the House, you know, could look at. So I'm just wondering about things that we can do that are going to be, you know, servicing at a greater level. I think all of this is extremely important, but again, going through the state agency, I mean, I have no specific thoughts right now. I'm just kind of observing and gathering my thoughts.
That's great. And yeah, the state agencies. So it's one route is regarding bills, but the other one is what could our state agencies be doing different? So if there are certain things that come up for you, then we could look at state agencies and what they could be doing different as recommendations. And definitely CYFD comes in that for sure.
Right.
Linda had, thank you for allowing me to share, blah, 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 a campaign from the state to talk about racism. Want to say a little bit about that, Senator Lopez?
The state has money. The state has monies to use for PR. You know, we have campaigns for CYFD. We have campaigns for, you know, for different efforts that the state puts forward. They could also begin a public service announcement around racism.
That's fantastic. My goodness.
It's part of the
because
budget.
that's undoing.
It's a budget. It's something that, Mark, of what you just mentioned, that can happen like now, you know, with the proper language and such, but the state can begin doing some public service announcements and campaigns, 30 seconds on the news, 30 seconds on wherever they have their buy of advertising. They can do that now.
That's fantastic. That's definitely something.
I agree with that. I was going to suggest it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's in the budget. They can prioritize a little bit in there. We fund it. It's there.
Perfect. That's definitely an area we could dive into in this committee. Tammy, I think those are large enough areas for us to grapple with at this stage. Anything else on the agenda, Tammy, that you're thinking we should address before we close?
Okay, we've pretty much covered everything. We have the short term and long term. We've had a wonderful presentation by Senator Lopez. Thank you so much. And just if there's any other questions, and then for the most part, we can close. Also, Senator Lopez, please don't forget to send me the link so I can send that out.
Thank you, everyone. Final comments from any one of you. Anything, Mark, Joseph?
No,
I
no.
know, last word.
Well, nothing
just
for me.
wanted
I
to
just would like to thank, yeah, I wanted to thank the senator. I wanted to thank everyone who's here.
Yeah, and I wanted to do the same.
Beautiful. I want to thank everyone too. Thank you, Senator Lopez and Mark and Joseph and Tammy and everyone and the interpreters and yeah. And the next meeting, Tammy, so that we're clear, is 2 weeks from now, right?
Yes, I am so sorry about the little mix up there, but we should get it straight. And for whatever reason, I don't know, Elisa could not get in. I'm not sure. I kept sending her the link. So that's why she wasn't here. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. But other than that, we will see you in 2 weeks at 8:30. And that is, the date is going to be on the 1st of October. Wow, I can't believe it's already going to be October.
No, October. Oh my God. No.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Just
Take
thank
care
you
of
to
each other.
each of you. If I may say, just thank you to each of you who do the work. We have, we do this together, and I'm just honored that I get to work with each of you. But just thank you from the bottom of my heart. We're going to make the change.
Mhm.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, let me put screen here. I think that did it.
Oh, okay, you got it. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.